What's up everyone, Maximilian here, and welcome back to Street Fighter Cross Tekken, the Online Warrior, and this is gonna be Season 2. Although we didn't even have that much of a Season 1, Street Fighter Cross Tekken for the most part did not have that many people online, although there was a pretty consistent basis of players that would continually play the game, even up until the release of 2013, so the Online Warrior series, especially for this game, was kind of lacking. I think we only got up to like less than 15 episodes in the first season, but hopefully that's going to change now because the overall perspective and the overall how Street Fighter Cross Tekken has kind of evolved to this new version of 2013 is pretty interesting, and how the game has actually come up to a point where the community is somewhat very open to it. There are some people that naturally just don't like the game engine and in turn just don't like the game itself. But let's kind of talk about where all that negativity came from before we get into like the bigger changes of SFXT 2013 and why you should probably check it out. Not to mention the fact that the game is like dirt cheap now. I literally think that you can buy it on Steam for like 22 bucks and get all the DLC and all the costumes for along with that cost. Anyway, the big issue with Street Fighter Cross Tekken for this history lesson is the fact that the game launched within a few-month period after a previous fighting game from Capcom, which was Ultimate Marvel 3, and just before that there was a release for Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition 2012. So that made 3 big title releases from Capcom fighting game-wise of their AAA fighting games over the span of literally 6 months. So people were kind of burned out already of Capcom fighters because there were so many of them in such a short time span. But for the most part, there was a lot of excitement for Street Fighter Cross Tekken when it first came out, and I was actually personally extremely excited because I had played the game quite a bit before release, and I was like, there's a lot of cool, fun stuff in here. Oh, notably, when the game finally came out, there was some really bad, abusable things like jabs and certain abilities of some characters, like the splashes of Hugo and things like that made the game feel very cheap to an extent. Some other characters had very high priority moves, and it was just very hard to do things with other characters in the cast based off some certain tier lists. Characters like Rolento, characters like Rufus, and things like that seem to be very powerful. However, Street Fighter Cross Tekken would not last in the competitive spotlight for very long. I think it only got about a month, maybe a month and a half before people really started to turn a blind eye. And that's because within the first couple of weeks of the game being out, it was completely exposed that all of the downloadable, like 20 extra characters that were eventually released in September were actually, or maybe even earlier than that, it might have been like July. All these characters were on the disc as DLC, and this caused a huge fiasco with Capcom and was essentially one of the big turning points of why people generally hate Capcom as a company from that point forward. And after that, everyone hated the game. Everyone was just like, stupid game. Anything that was minute or small that you could find wrong about it, people would blow it into proportions that were absolutely huge because they could not believe what Capcom was doing with the DLC practices of this game. And it wasn't a very smart thing on Capcom's part. I mean, you gotta wonder like who was making the decision of actually keeping DLC characters on the disc. Even if your characters are finished, you don't put them on a disc of the game, because quite literally for any game that is released nowadays, and you can probably advise me if there's any situation where this hasn't happened, if there is DLC on a disc, it's almost exposed before the game is even out, which is kind of crazy to think, but there are people out there who get into these games, they hack them, they use all their hex editors, and they look in and they find out what's going on with the game before it's even released. So this happened with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and it kind of was the huge competitive downfall because everyone hated it for one reason or another. There were a lot of big issues, things like timeouts, things like glitchy characters, things like awkward stun animations, and a lot of just really broken stuff. What I find funny is that the time that Street Fighter Cross Tekken developed, the most exciting part of its competitive quote-unquote career didn't come at the hands of the multiplayer options, which is where a lot of us, including myself, were thinking that this game is going to strive off of its multiplayer. You know, it's 2 versus 2, the scramble battle, all this stuff seems like a really fun variant because, for the most part, the single player, like 1 versus 1 player aspect, even though it's a team game, was very lacking, and a lot of people on stream were just like, this is the most boring thing in the world because you're seeing the same combos over and over again, and there's pauses in animation, and the time was always running out, quite almost always running out. In EVO, this was kind of apparent as well. No one really gave 2 wits about Street Fighter Cross Tekken at EVO, even though they set it up to be 2 versus 2, and that was based off like one team versus another team. They thought that would bring a lot of excitement to it, but not really, and it kind of a lot of people wanted to even see singles. But for the most part, after that, the next amount of hype that Street Fighter Cross Tekken actually generated, besides the 2013 version, even after the DLC characters, not many people cared. But once the Street Fighter Cross Tekken 25th anniversary tournament took place, people were starting to pay attention to some pretty crazy things that were being exposed by players that you not really had heard of before. Guys using like characters like Kuma, you know, and even Infiltration coming from, you know, winning Street Fighter 4 finals and winning Street Fighter Cross Tekken finals as well was pretty exciting. The fact that the guy was this damn good at these type of games. So here we are finally at today, almost a year after the launch of Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and about 9 months of those, the game was not really played by many people, and there was still small audience or group of people that still enjoyed the game, which was myself. I kind of like the core gameplay of Street Fighter Cross Tekken. The thing is, and this still applies to 2013, in this game, it is pretty hard to beat somebody that really knows what they're doing. There's some random factors to Street Fighter 4, there's a lot of random factors to Ultimate Marvel 3, but to get really good at those games is to be able to control those situations, to control the abilities of what you have compared to what your partner or who you're facing might have, and always coming out on top the victor. And that can be very challenging in Street Fighter 4, and especially in a game like Ultimate Marvel 3. But in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, there's not a lot of like crazy hype moments, because the people that are generally really good at the game always end up making like top 3 or top 8 for the most part in these big tournaments. You'd always see the same players consistently because it was pretty obvious who was the better player in many situations in a game of Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and they always just came out on top. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, it's kind of up to, like, you know, the testament of who's playing the game. Because that mentality that the good player should always be the good player, the good player should always be the winning player, is something that comes from older Street Fighter games, like pre-Street Fighter 4. Games like Capcom vs. SNK 2, Super Turbo, the Alpha series, all these games, if you went up against somebody that knew what they were doing, there was a fat chance in hell that you were going to get, you know, probably less than 50% off of their health bar. They were just really good at the game, and that's kind of where the huge barrier of entry for fighting games existed for so long. And then other games came out later, like Street Fighter 4, Ultimate Marvel 3, and many other fighting games not from Capcom, that kind of alleviated this issue to make it more easily accessible to players that didn't exactly know what was going on, to kind of give them a chance. And even in Street Fighter Cross Tekken 2013, this still stands the test of time. So it's kind of crazy to think. Now let's talk about the game in its current state. A lot of people seem to be really enjoying the game. I don't know if it's the fact that people kind of forgot about the huge issues before and kind of like let them fall by the wayside, but for the most part, the majority of the community and people playing Street Fighter Cross Tekken, there's a lot of people playing this game right now, seem to really be liking it. I'm actually enjoying it a lot. The biggest challenge I've had so far, if you guys have been watching any of my matches, is figuring out what in the hell I am supposed to be doing against all these Tekken characters, especially the newer DLC Tekken characters. They all seem to have like overheads that can do ridiculous combo damage, and that's the scary part, is that is a mechanic in this game that is very powerful. Overheads that do crazy amounts of damage after, like 300 to 400 damage, which is a lot. The other huge change to Street Fighter Cross Tekken in its current form is the fact that everything is just more damaging, it feels like. Generally, you need a couple of mix-ups to kill your opponent, and they're dead. It takes off like a third to a fourth of their health every once in a while, or a third to nearly half of their health. And it's like, man, you just need to mix up somebody once or twice. If you have meter, they're dead, as long as you got some good powerful combos. Some characters don't rely on this. Some characters rely on a long set string of hit confirms, and matches still can last pretty long. But even recently, there was this Capcom Invitational tournament that took place up in NorCal, where the Capcom headquarters is. It was hosted by Combo Fiend and Hans, and it was a good opportunity to see some of the more proficient players at the game going at it, because they all wanted to show up. Guys like, you know, PR Balrog and Ricky Ortiz, and some other new guys that showed up, and it was just like, damn, dude, this stuff is pretty exciting. And that's kind of the thing, is like, what happened to this game to make it more exciting? And I really think it's the flow. People don't, not flow like the Bashi guy. People forget about this thing called like the flow of a match. How a match continually paces itself on, and how long it takes to continue a game, and how exciting things happen in between the matches. One of the things that was really jarring in the first Street Fighter Cross Tekken was the fact that the camera stopped at a brief period when you tagged in your character based off of like a cross rush combo, and that definitely does help a lot, but I think the damage overall really has affected the flow of this game, and it feels like a much more scary game. Like, you can see rounds end within 20 seconds now, which was almost impossible in previous Street Fighter Cross Tekken, except for some very rare situations, and it can frequently happen now. It's pretty shocking and kind of surprising that this game has come to the point where it was a game where you did not have to take many risks. You did not have to do much because you rode the clock out in many situations in the first version of the game, leading for a lot of boring matches, but if you wanted to win, that's kind of what you had to do. If you weren't being offensive and sitting back and being really defensive about everything, you kind of had this situation where things got really boring, really fast, and timeouts happened all the time, and this somewhat seems to have been alleviated. The timeout issue is not completely gone by any means, but because your characters can now do so much more damage, is what makes Street Fighter Cross Tekken 2013 a much more interesting game in my opinion. I feel like I was actually a little bit better at the original version of the game, but now that all these DLC characters are being played so much, I find it much more challenging now because I have to get back into it and start learning all these characters. Like, I had like an 80% something win ratio in Street Fighter Cross Tekken Vanilla, which is just absolutely crazy, and I don't even think that's correct really, and this was in ranked games. And that's definitely dropping quite a bit now that many more people are paying attention to the game. There's a lot more players and a lot more characters and a lot more stuff going on, because in the original SFXT, when you played vanilla games online, you saw a lot of the same characters. A lot of the same stuff over and over and over again, because people weren't coming up with new technology, people weren't coming up with new setups or things like that. And I think this is what is really interesting for the future of this game, considering we're talking about its lifetime and how it's pretty much resurrected from its grave at some point, and it's now sitting pretty high amongst the community spotlight, and I think will actually make some headlines in like tournaments that come up in the near future. I think this game will actually be looked forward to in tournaments, is the fact that Street Fighter Cross Tekken now is probably going to change quite severely, because now that more people are playing the game, and a lot of these guys that figure out these crazy tactics, these strategies, and this technology that these characters have, since there's more people playing, there's going to be more people creating content and figuring things out. And that's one of the things that keeps a fighting game alive for so long. I think that's why Ultimate Marvel 3 especially remains one of the most exciting games, is because literally, like, we're almost over a year after Ultimate Marvel 3 has been out, and like a year and some months now. And every big major tournament that comes up, you see something new and absolutely ballistic crazy that you didn't even know what was possible before most of the time, and that's really exciting to still continually see new things. And that's a result of the combat engine and how the game was designed. I think it was designed open-ended for that reason. But with Street Fighter Cross Tekken now, it might not have such an open-ended system, but it definitely lends itself to having something probably to the point of which Street Fighter 4 does, at least a little bit more, because of the tag mechanic and all the different functionalities the game has to offer. There's a lot of stuff I think this game is still waiting to be discovered. Guys like Desk would make multiple videos based off technology and just crazy glitches and bugs that the original vanilla version of the game actually had, and no one knew because no one bothered to try. No one cared. No one wanted to see this stuff anymore, so why do it? And he just put up a few videos of like, look at all this stuff possible. This game is so untapped, it's crazy, and I think that's really true, and I think that is especially true for version 2013. I can't wait to see what happens in the near future. I can't wait to see guys that come up with stuff for the characters that I frequently use, and I'll just totally X-copy it and go into some ranked games and try to share it with everybody, because it really is cool to see people come up with stuff, and then for you to like, oh, that's my character, oh my god, I'm totally using that, you know, have originators of technology, and then that technology or these strategies move about to the public and everybody using them. It's kind of what keeps a fighting game going for a long time. It's just sharing that information and keeping it going and keeping the hype up for everybody. And I do think Street Fighter Cross Tekken might actually have a chance to keep that going. As far as future support for the game, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I think Capcom might be done with this game at this point. It might receive some balance adjustments or maybe a patch or two from this point forward, but it really depends on how the community perceives the game. And if you actually want to try getting into a Street Fighter game, this is probably a better title than Street Fighter 4. A lot of people ask me, what type of fighting game should I get into? Like, which fighting game should I buy to try to get into fighting games? Well, I'm like, well, if you want to try similar ones where you get a lot of competition online and stuff along that nature, you probably would want to play Street Fighter 4. But with Street Fighter Cross Tekken's current version and the amount of players significantly increasing in the online environment, and considering the fact that the game is like probably $20, maybe $15 for the console versions, I'm not too sure, is a pretty big benefactor. Capcom kind of missed their opportunity to make big sales with this game because it got horrible word of mouth, and the game kind of bombed for that reason, and for whatever reason they continued to provide support for it and give us a version that was actually functional instead of something that we had in the past that was still a pretty good game in my opinion, but people just did not want to play that. And a lot of people seem to find the changes and all of the differences between 2013 and the original version pretty amazing, and it's kind of shocking to see this all these people super excited about playing Street Fighter Cross Tekken again, because it's like kind of like deja vu for me. I saw that when the game was first out, and then all of a sudden it was just gone, and there was just nothing but hatred towards the game for the longest time. So hopefully this means that we will see continued support for the game. Hopefully it means that the communities of people that are looking for fighting games will actually check out Street Fighter Cross Tekken. It's cheap, and it's a game that is probably a pretty big barrier or easy barrier of entry to get into. And it also does still teach you fundamentals that are pretty important to the Street Fighter-verse, especially Capcom-based fighting games. And yeah, I still think that this game's going to be fun, and I think that the Online Warrior series will definitely continue, where I'll hopefully cover like topics, things that are going on within the community, tournament results and events, and talk about all the crazy stuff that hopefully will be happening over the next few months with this game. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to check out more Street Fighter Cross Tekken footage, I actually have a multitude of videos up on the channel right now, including a full week of, and I'm currently running through the game using Yoshimitsu and trying to get better with some of the more awkward characters. So leave me a comment below if you guys enjoyed the video, or if you enjoy the fact that Street Fighter Cross Tekken has come back to the Online Warrior series. Until next time, my name is Maximilian, and I'll see you guys later.